Let's go back to 1991 when there were 151 murders in the city of Boston. And let's go back to the neighborhood organizations who organized so that now most of those neighborhoods are safer. As Frank was just talking about, the area by Freeport Street and Dorchester Avenue and also parts of South Boston have really seen a resurgence of safer neighborhoods that people actually want to come to. How did they get that way? Well, they got that way because some of the residents I just met with on Georgia Street, someone who lived in a building for 40 years, the same apartment building for 40 years. A couple of residents who lived there for 17 years and a couple who lived there for 16 years. They called the police every single day. And you're not playing. They called the police every day. And they started neighborhood associations. And they took back their neighborhoods. So this concept around, I don't call it parochialism, I call it community.
We have been going through a building boom, thank goodness, after the recession for we architects and others in the building industry. And in 2.5 years, we have built a third already of the mayor's goal of 53,000 new units, which was supposed to take until 2030. So on the supply side, we're actually doing quite well. But as most of you know, the average rents are rising, mostly because the vacancy rates are in the 3.5 range. And from 2000 to 2016, you can see here, a tremendous increase, and this is for the city of the Boston region. The big bubble on the top right is the city of Boston, which is just sort of in the astronomical range. And a lot of that, as we know, is land price speculation, the cost of building, the cost of approvals, et cetera. But the thing that is worrisome to most of us is that the percent of affordable units is also falling. So whereas in the 1990s it was around 40%, it's now hovering around 18%. And when you look at this, I just picked a car metaphor. What we're building is 82% of the big guys with the big trunks and the leather interiors, when what we really want is something that's electric, has a low carbon footprint, takes up less space, and is affordable to most people. But unfortunately, building is not like cars. It's not a factory sort of production line. So we have, many, many issues that we need to deal with. But still, when we look at these numbers, I personally wish that the percentages were reversed, right? If we were to match our population, we would actually want to build 18% luxury and probably more like 82% modest. How do we do that? So not for a lack of trying. The city initiatives, I have 3 slides that look like this, of everything that the current mayor is doing. Unfortunately, he and the staff inherited a legacy from the prior mayor of really tamping down development, and they were actually proud that there was a high barriers to entry city, they used to say all the time, which means developers had to work really, really hard to get any projects off the ground. Since then, you can see, I'm not going to read through this list, but the ability to try to move on their feet, even as the 2030 Boston plan, Imagine Boston, was going through the laborious consensus building process. There are growth zones, which allow more density. There's initiatives to focus on seniors, on workforce housing, on accessory dwellings, on housing stability. You can read these yourselves. Special resources for affordable housing, including the Community Preservation Act, the Inclusionary Development Policy, et cetera, et cetera. And really a great effort on ending homelessness, and just really a ton of initiatives there. In our small way, the BSA has been trying for the last year to affect change by thinking about whether we can make smaller units that are more efficient, cost less to build, and target the parts of our population that really need it. That includes the Yoo-Hoo, which was a modular studio that's 385 square feet that traveled to 8 neighborhoods and got a tremendously positive response. And why do we care about small housing? Well, for one thing, we are really focused on the demographics, which are that more than 2/3 of our population in the city are 1- and 2-person households. But when you look at our housing stock, which was built in the post-war, less than 1/3 of it are studios and 1-beds. And what that means is that it has a rippling effect throughout the entire housing situation in Boston. So, for example, seniors who don't have smaller units, more affordable units to move to, cannot downsize, so they stay in their places, and there aren't any houses available for those families who want to grow into those. Students, young workforce, we hear about them all the time. They'd actually like to live alone, but they bunk up. They put 2, 3, 4 people. They can pay much more in rent, as we all know, and they price out those families. Baby boomers who are coming from the suburbs into the city can pay more, and so they price out seniors, they price out millennials with college debt and limited incomes. But we also see that those same baby boomers are straddled with the same problem, which is that when they can't move to units that suit them, their kids and the grandparents also end up living with them. So it is this ripple effect throughout the entire housing stock, which is why we focus on small housing. So we've kind of come to the conclusion that for many of these groups, we could use a whole batch of affordable smaller units that would then relieve some of the pressure on the family housing in Boston. Also, it's an economic reason why we push small units. One is that when you build a small unit at $300 a square foot, it's $120,000 to build. But when you build a 3-bedroom, which is 3 times the size, it's 3 times more, and then the market rent becomes astronomical. So one of the things that many folks have said, and I just want to repeat it, is that rather than building a lot of new construction for families, which is very expensive, could we consider preserving more of the existing stock for families because it's less expensive to renovate? So some examples from the neighborhood project in South Boston, which has actually no market rate residential units. It's by a nonprofit community development corporation in the middle. 15 affordable units, small units, but not micro, no parking. And this is one of those little models that, there are sites all through Boston, little infill sites that could be used to think about having more units and less parking. And if you want to see the alternative, you can just look at the building next door, which is 6 units of condos with 2 parking spaces at the bottom. And so which one is a better neighbor could be asked as a question. The 6 units, none of them are affordable. Another project, and these are just projects I grabbed from my office. This one, so to Tori's point, when he looks down the street, he doesn't necessarily see that in this building at 700 Harrison, there's only 34 market rate and 50 of them are affordable. So this is by community builders, and their mission is to provide more affordable housing. Or this one in Roxbury, where the 64 market rate and almost 40 affordables. Again, lots of nonprofit developers are working pretty well in this space. It's the for-profit developers that are creating the crunch where there's a lot of profit and not very much in the way of affordables. This one, in the Longwood Medical area, 60 affordable rentals, 43 affordable condos, 42 market rate, and a daycare. So these projects, they may look luxurious and expensive on the outside, but there is really a movement underfoot that's sort of invisible about making these deals that work. How about this one in Chinatown? Also, almost 100 affordable apartments in a high-rise tower. Really, really hard to do in steel construction, but people are doing it. So last, I wanted to leave you with this little case study of a project we're working on in Washington Heights, where we proposed to the city councilor that my developer client build 20% affordable in this new high-rise building at this little site that used to be a gas station. And you can see the rest of the neighborhood is fairly low scale. And when we met with the city councilor, city councilors, he actually said, no way. I don't want you to gentrify my neighborhood. I don't want 80% market rate. You got to go 50 or no deal. And basically my developer put the project on hold to try to figure out how he could do that. And what he came up with is a partnership with Related Beal, where he's now doing 100% affordable. And the way that he does that is Related has figured out this financial model, and a few other developers have, where with subsidies and with keeping the building costs low, and again, the site is low because it was owned, the site cost is low, they can manage to get this deal financials to work. And the other issue is it goes all the way up from 60% AMI to 140% AMI. So it really is in the high level of workforce housing for the rents. But still, when you look at it in the future, you could have had a project where only 20% of the units were deed restricted, and instead now all 160 units for the rest of time will be deed restricted. And so it's a strategy that is, I think, a really, really interesting one going forward in Boston.
Tamara got into setting the stage here, talking about the mayor's program of the 2030 housing, where the report's quoted by saying that Boston will reach more than 700,000 residents, a number the city has not seen since the 1950s, by 2030. But getting things built in the city of Boston is notoriously difficult. And that's really where the rubber hits the road and what we want to talk about today. Central to the building and the approvals are the neighborhood groups, the groups that rule the public permitting process. If you want to get something built in the city, whether it's a roof deck or a skyscraper, it's the neighborhood groups that serve as the gatekeepers. No trips to the Zoning Board of Appeal are allowed without first meeting with the closest neighborhood group. This is a required part of the formal permitting process. I know this not only as a land use attorney and as a former city councilor, but also as a resident of the city of East Boston when I see the flyers placed underneath my door for a neighborhood meeting that's happening for a development project down the street in my community. Now, I don't go to those meetings, and in a part, that might be part of the problem. In fact, let's just do a quick poll here. Who in this room, not as a proponent, not as an architect, not as a lawyer, but as a neighbor, who goes to their neighborhood meetings to sit in the room and see the presentations, whether it's a front porch or a skyscraper in your neighborhood? Raise your hand. I mean, that's pretty good. I'd say it's 30% of the room, not counting us professionals here who have to go, or former professionals who had to go. That's probably a high number. This is a very active crowd here. Most of us don't typically go to these meetings. We're left with a collection of residents who are the self-appointed gatekeepers of their neighborhood. If they don't like the height or the mass of your project, there's a good chance you're going to change it. If they don't like the design of the project, there's a good chance you're going to change that. So vehemently opposed are these groups to certain projects, and there's exceptions all the time, that there's been a backlash where there's been an emergence of a group of new neighbors who are, not just in Boston, but throughout cities in America, who are now calling themselves YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard. YIMBYs, this is a true thing. The Jamaica Plain has the first group of YIMBYs. Yes, in my backyard. Their point is to, if you build, rents will go down. And indeed, in January, in a report in the Boston Globe, they announced that there was a modest decrease, though, in rents in Greater Boston amid all the flurry of this new development. Tonight, we catch a glimpse into those neighborhood group meetings by the people who are paid to go to them. Our panel of city councilors, Councilor Baker, Councilor Lenahan, and Councilor Jackson, have seen it all. We'll ask them to tell us how they balance production versus parochialism, the need to build our city with all that means, the micro-housing, the affordable housing, the parking ratios, Balance that with the need to satiate the neighborhood groups, the politics of the neighborhoods. Also, we heard from Tamara Roy, who helped balance out the conversation. We'll hear back from her maybe in a question or two, as we hope to hear from all of you. So let me get into the first to get us kind of primed and going and start to think out in the crowd what you'd like to. And I'd like to start with Bill, Councilor Lenahan. And Councilor, I remember, I don't know, a year and a half ago, showing up in Boston City Hall on the 8th floor at the Zoning Board of Appeal for a project I was working on. And the room was flooded with residents from South Boston, from your district, all with their stickers. And the project, I think, was the Gate of Heaven project, which was a church in South Boston, which is being converted into housing, or was proposed to anyway. And there were so many opponents in the Zoning Board of Appeal room, you couldn't actually get into the room. It was like a fire hazard. But as I understand it, Councilor, both you and I believe Mayor Walsh actually supported the project, which is, it's a bit of a profile in courage, because this was a motley mob out there. So, Councilor, tell us, give us a glimpse into just how that works when you decide to go along with maybe the politics or perhaps the parochialism of the day, or when you choose to fight and say, no, this is the hill I want to fight on.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for choosing me first. And for the nice segue. That particular instance is just one of a number in my 10-year career on the city council. The reason for that particular project and the support is that they wanted to take a school that the Archdiocese owned that was a neighborhood school and has been closed for 10 years. And what they were proposing was to put like 26 units with 50 some odd parking spaces, probably the broadest development and the least dense project in the entire community ever. And the community said, no, we want a school there. So we realized from the beginning that there were other agendas going on there, not just the development agenda. The Gate of Heaven School, the parish and the Archdiocese were having their feuds over a 10, 15-year period with the South Boston community. This was probably the absolute best development you could ever get for that particular site, and it would have been the least intrusive on a community, and so we all supported it. But in my 10 years in District 2, 50% of all the development that occurred in this city occurred in District 2. So in 1/9 of the city, 55 million square feet out of 104 million square feet.
And Bill, the district, it's not just the neighborhood of South Boston.
No, it includes South End, downtown, Chinatown, Bay Village, and now it even includes this area here. It used to run up just to Downtown Crossing. But 43% in those 10 years of all residential units were built in this district. And South Boston is no different than Bay Village or in the South End when it comes to the parochial interest of the neighborhood and the impacts of the development. It's what I've managed for these 10 years. And it's at sometimes you just don't think it's possible to get to an end result. Part of the problem is that the previous administration just never really got warm to creating new zoning. And zoning is key to stabilizing development going forward. Out of the 43% of the residential units, 23% of the affordable residential units occurred in this district over that 10-year period. And it's the fastest growing district. So we had the most population in 2010 when they did the census, and we already have the most population again. So we continue to grow at an extraordinary rate. Much of the development of this city the revenue that's generated from the city has been on the back of District 2. And so the rubs that go, the daily rubs with building both residential and commercial development in an ever-growing district is what we've been dealing with. And I really believe that zoning is a key component. There are other instances where, I'll take one that's similar to the garage. In Bay Village, at the entrance of Bay Village in Park Square, there was this dirty old parking lot. It has been there forever. And during my 10 years, they would renew the permit for that, and the neighborhood would be totally against it. But because there was no proposal, and the gentleman was running a small business that we supported it, and it occurred. Well, now there's a development on the table for 19 stories, and it would change the whole entrance from Park Square into Bay Village in the most positive way, and there's a lot of shaking heads. So the
This
impact.
is the Eric Hawley architect with is that the one that's in the old, next to where the old Jay's restaurant was over there? Is that, or is this something else?
It's right across from the steakhouse there.
Fleming's, yeah. I think that's the one, right? Yeah.
Fleming's, yeah.
Huh? The old
Yeah.
Jay's, yeah. Yeah.
And so, it happens in every neighborhood. And it's part of this. I've been around in politics for 30 plus years in the city, and during the Flynn administration, they empowered the neighborhood groups by practice, and they just grew and grew. And then the Menino administration took that to a whole nother level, and it allows politicians to sit back and not have to make tough decisions on a lot of times. And so it's great that people are involved. You really need them to come to forums and state, but we are elected to make these decisions. So I feel that during my 10 years, I've balanced this idea of parochialism versus production to a way that it's produced much for the city, and I feel that our city's grown in a reasonable way. Has there been displacement? Yes. Anytime there's major investment, there is displacement. Affordability? Yeah, do we need more affordability? Absolutely. But affordable is a term that goes from paying $600 a month to at 160 AMI, it could mean a whole other thing. And in many of Boston's neighborhoods today, middle-class people are now being displaced. So those that are truly disadvantaged, financially and economically, are being cared for through public housing and public subsidies, along with the IDP program. But we need to be also looking at middle-class housing and many of the new people who come to our
And the IDP program is the portion that every new development would build 13% on new construction. So, Bill, that was a great synopsis. We're going to come back to you.
Sure.
I want to go to Frank and Councilor Baker. Councilor, Dorchester, which you represent,
Yep.
is the new IT neighborhood. Have you heard this?
I guess, yeah.
Everyone wants to move, develop, buy something in Dorchester. It's hot. It's very hot. It's just 2 or 3 T stops from downtown Boston. So it's now a very and people are moving there. People are buying there. People are building there. What's happening at the ground? What's happening in the neighborhood level? Is there an effort to stop that, or is it, what's happening?
It's not a neighborhood-wide effort to stop development. I don't know how many groups everybody else has, but I have 35 groups within my district, and they're all pretty different. Some places are straight. We don't want anything built. A lot of times I hear when I go to my groups, we don't want to become South Boston.
Do you just mind?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
I think because it's being recorded.
Yep.
So,
A lot of my groups will say, we don't want to become South Boston. No disrespect to you, but so what I try and tell these people now. I've been in the same neighborhood. I'm 50 this year. I've been in the same neighborhood for the 50 years. I grew up during a time, the 70s. It was busing. It was different crises that happened. So I watched basically all my contemporaries move away. I watched massive disinvestment along Dorchester Ave and all the businesses. We were that neighborhood that wasn't any one ethnic group. We were Irish, Italian, Polish, Black, Spanish, and then in the 80s it was huge Vietnamese populations. But the way our neighborhood used to operate and used to run, we would have that corner store that you could go. I'm one of 13 also, so I grew up 5 in a bedroom.
One of 13.
You want to talk? You want to talk? Sharing, yeah. Never had my own sneakers, but whatever, yeah. So we were able to. My parents raising us were able to. We had corner stores that were there that served a market that knew us. So my mother could send my oldest brother down to Siegel's Market at the corner of the street with a note, and we called it the cuff. You put it on the arm. They would allow us to feed our families, and then at the end of the week or the end of the month, my father would go and pay all that. So now fast forward 30, 35, 40 years later, we go through the disinvestment. Through my eyes, I'm thrilled to have people in my neighborhood and want to invest there. The way that I deal with or try to deal with development is I like to meet the people that are coming to invest in my neighborhood because I think the people in Dorchester want someone's word. They want to know that if you're coming in and you're building a building, that it's going to be a good building, that we're going to have something to look at. In 20 years, the buildings aren't falling apart. But another interesting that's going on in my district is we have, I'm working on two areas right now. One of them is actually 50 acres, and the other one is probably 75 acres. One would be, and it's all different landowners and different people that would be involved in these areas. One is UMass and that whole master plan down there, which would be the Globe site, the Santander site, the UMass site. I don't know if people saw that the Globe floated that UMass wanted to do a stadium. That might be difficult, but my job, one of the problems being an elected, the easiest word for an elected official when someone's yelling at you is, okay, no, we'll all just say no. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to look at a project and see within that project the value that it has and be able to have the gumption, whatever you want to call it, to be able to sit there in a non-emotional way and say, I think this project is good because. Now, the easy way, I can just say, no, just no, we don't want it because this guy doesn't want it, or the traffic or the parking. We're always going to have traffic. We're always going to have parking issues. I don't think Dorchester Ave is ever going to get any better. I don't think we're going to be able to design anything that's going to have us move more quickly on Dorchester Ave. So my role is to try and look at those projects and to see, back to South Boston, what South Boston does have is good amenities. They have people walking on the streets, and that walking on the streets, that livelihood that you see on the streets is where your safety comes in. Some of my areas might not necessarily be places where you're just going to park your vehicle and get out and walk around. This one area, we're going through a planning study, the planning exercise, it will be jumping off in the next couple of weeks for Glover's Corner. Anybody's familiar with it, it's where Freeport Street intersects with Hancock Street and Dorchester Ave. People familiar with Dot Block is going there. Dot Block was a lot larger of a project when it first came on the scene. Some property owners have walked away, so we ended up with less of a project. But that whole area is now being looked at as a way to, as a whole new, almost, I don't want to say new neighborhood because it will be within our neighborhood, but we're uniquely positioned in Dorchester. We have these parcels where if we're planning 50 acres, we may end up pie in the sky. What I would like to see, I'd like to see a library in there, some parks in there, some real connections. Now that parcel will be 5 minutes from Savin Hill train station. So if we're not planning those large parcels, so the people that are living in these buildings that won't have vehicles, that's what everybody tells me, they won't have vehicles, they're able to walk, not only just walk to the station, but walk to the station safely. In some of our neighborhoods, safety is a big concern. I never felt unsafe in my neighborhood, but I can see how someone from, I don't know, any town USA may come to Dot Ave and say, well, this is pretty scary. So I hope that maybe answered a little
Yeah,
bit
you
of
gave
it.
us a lot to, and this distinction between no parking and in South Boston, 1.5 parking spaces per unit, right? It's something we may want to come back to. Someone may want to bring it up as a question. Thank you, Frank. That was good. Let me just go to Tito, and then we're going to open it up. Tito Jackson, Councilor Jackson. Let's go back to Tori's comment, who it appears you met with from his website.
Yeah, I just texted him. He's actually very happy that you all watched his video.
Yeah, I bet. Well, if we thought about it, we would have had him here with us tonight. Would have been a great feature. But he was with us. And we saw his video. But Councilor, his argument, certainly an argument I've heard, I know an argument you've heard, is one that says, I'd rather have you not build anything. Forget about the development, forget about the housing, forget about the coffee shop and the restaurant and all the things that might make this neighborhood beautiful, because in the long run, what that's actually going to do is that's going to increase the rents. And people like me who have lived here for years and years and years will be priced out. It's an argument. I'm not saying it's one I agree with, but it is one I understand. What do you say to that argument? And what are you hearing in gentrified neighborhoods?
So I guess the first thing I would simply say is that let's pull back as to why people want to live in these neighborhoods. So let's go back to 1991 when there were 151 murders in the city of Boston. And let's go back to the neighborhood organizations who organized so that now some of those neighborhoods most of those neighborhoods are safer. As Frank was just talking about, the area by Freeport Street and Dorchester Avenue and also parts of South Boston have really seen a resurgence of safer neighborhoods that people actually want to come to. How did they get that way? Well, they got that way because some of the residents I just met with on Georgia Street, someone who lived in a building for 40 years, the same apartment building for 40 years. A couple of residents who lived there for 17 years and a couple who lived there for 16 years. They called the police every single day. And you're not playing. They called the police every day. And they started neighborhood associations. And they took back their neighborhoods. So this concept around, I don't call it parochialism, I call it community. And so I believe we do need to acknowledge that there's a vested interest in these neighborhoods and communities because, by the way, Frank's district didn't get closer to downtown, right? Bill's district didn't suddenly move and get closer and cooler, right? So I think that's one of the perspectives that we need to really look at. Let's also look at the numbers in the city of Boston. 50% of people in the city of Boston make $35,000 or less. So let's talk about the real Boston. And when we speak about having this conversation about market rent, we actually have to talk about what the real market is for people who live in the city of Boston. And also let's talk about the economic disparities. We are number one in the nation in terms of economic disparity based on the Brookings Institute. 3 years ago, we were number 3, and now we are in the unenviable place of being number 1. And so I just put that out because I think it's really important that we not look at people as just simply NIMBYs. It's that they actually want their neighborhood to be nice. They want their neighborhood to be clean. They want it to be safe, and they want those amenities. But they do not want to be disrespected. They do not want people to come in and tell them that they're fixing their neighborhood, that they're fixing their community. And that's very off-putting for people who've lived there for years. Because, by the way, many of those folks in the neighborhood that I grew up in, I grew up on a street where I'm one of 7. Next door to me was a guy who had an ice cream truck, and he had a house. He had a whole house, and he drove an ice cream truck. Next door to him was a dry cleaner. And down the street was the Bowling family. It's a storied family in political life. So that's a real component that I think have to look at. The other piece that we have to look at is that the city of Boston does not do planning. We do development, but we do not do planning. And the reason why I say that, if everything is an exception and you have to go to the ZBA for everything, then that means there's no rules, right? And so what we need to look at, and I want to give Bill props here, in the corridor around Harrison Avenue, they actually pulled back and brought people together and looked at the same thing. And by the way, you know what? They built ink blot and a whole bunch of housing around there with the community. And so the issue that I have is that we continue to piecemeal things. And actually, even when you look at Imagine Boston, oh my goodness, Imagine Boston 2030, the 5 places that they want to build are where people want to build already, right? The one concept that they didn't look at, and I want to give props to Stephen Gray, is simply a couple of those places are going to be underwater in 30 years. So when your loan is paid off, and I was joking earlier, maybe you could actually you might be able to toss in some scuba gear with your with your loan. That becomes an issue. So what we did in Roxbury is we got together a group of folks, and we started an organization called Reclaim Roxbury. So for those who aren't from Boston, Roxbury, there was going to be a highway that went through the city of Boston. And right through Roxbury, the inner belt highway. And so there's 1.3 million square feet of undeveloped land that I consider hallowed ground because they moved people out of their homes. They tore them down. And so the question is, what do we do with that land? How do we govern that land? And how is it given out? And so a couple of ideas I would toss out. One, I believe that we could get added density if people came and actually did planning processes. And we've seen this with the land trust over at DSNI, where people have actually voted for additional density. But again, you need to come to the community with respect. And understanding that the people who are closest to these sites and problems, I believe, have a lot of stake in building them up. In addition, I think there's a couple of other things that are really cool that are actually happening. I want to give props to the folks in the JP Roxbury planning area. They pushed back on the BPDA, the BRA. Okay. For $660,000, you changed the name, but it's all good. But so they pushed back, and I guess I would call their policy lovingly turned down for what affordable housing policy, right? And what they said is, we're going to start their affordable housing policy the same way that someone sells their house. So no one puts their house on the market for the lowest price and then tries to go up. That's actually essentially what we do with IDP, right? We put 13% and then we try to nudge them up. So what they've done is actually asked for 30% affordable. It's either 30 or 35% affordable. And then if they get someone to bite on that, then they'll build. But if not, we can turn it down a little bit. And in this market where things are so profitable, I think there is a question as to are there several fold bottom lines that we can have relative to what's out there. So I think there's a couple of things that are really great. TOD is great, but the problem is we have the T.
Transit-oriented development.
Transit-oriented development, but we have the MBTA. So we're missing the T part, right? So we have trains that catch on fire, right? We have Orange Line trains that were literally the trains that were on the L, and when Old Dover Station was there, and Bill was going to Harry the Greeks, right? That's the same train, and it probably still has Bill's name inside the train, right? So we have an issue relative to transit, and I think that becomes an issue. And I guess the last thing I'll toss out is the most amazing thing about how we build housing today is that my house is built in 1905. And we essentially build housing the same way as we built housing in 1905. So I do think that we should be thinking about, and I would love if this were possibly something that paid livable wages, and maybe might be union, but I believe that we should have a factory that builds modular housing in the city of Boston. And if we were able to do that, we could create jobs, because the other issue that we have here is affordable housing is based on how much you make, right? So your housing is affordable based on how much you make. So if we had a factory that made, I have a friend who has a LEED Platinum certified 3-family house that costs $450,000 in Dorchester with all of the credits that she was able to get. So LEED Platinum certified, three units, and they're all 2-bedroom units. So that's another component that we have to think of, and I would love to partner with the carpenters in thinking about a way that we could actually do that in affordable. So that means $150,000 a unit. Oh my goodness. That would be a wonderful thing where we would actually have people being able to own and live in the city. And finally, we lose 52% of the students who come here within 6 months. And they go to places that, by the way, are actually more expensive than Boston. So the housing component isn't the only component, but it is one of several factors.
Folks, it's a rare night that these gentlemen don't have public meetings and discussions, so if you'll just join me in thanking them for sharing tonight with us.
There is a lot about biking infrastructure we had no idea about until we actually rode for 3 hours in Copenhagen rush hour. They have not only dedicated and separated curbed lanes, but whole bridges, ramps, and skyways just for bikes